Discarded like a worthless burden, a desperate 18-year-old orphan was cast out by her cold, calculating uncle with almost nothing to her name. The arrogant man was certain he had neatly disposed of a financial liability, expecting her to quietly fail and disappear. He had no idea the desolate, abandoned wasteland she bought for $1 secretly harbored a staggering hidden fortune. And he never suspected this ruined dirt concealed the exact power she needed to build a thriving homestead, obliterate his cruel expectations, and claim a legacy he could never touch. Settle in close with us for this one, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from tonight. Daisy Cole's life had been shaped by 3 people: her father, her mother, and a man named Silas Croft. Her parents, Thomas and Mary Cole, had run the mercantile in Prairie Ridge, a small but tidy business that sold everything from flour and salt pork to calico fabric and iron nails. They were quiet, decent people who loved their daughter with a steady, uncomplicated warmth. They taught her sums on a slate behind the counter and how to read from the pages of the catalogues that arrived by wagon twice a year. But a fever had swept through the valley when Daisy was 12, taking both of them within a week of each other, leaving her in the care of her father's only brother, Thaddeus. The second person to shape her, Silas Croft, was the town's blacksmith and wheelwright, a widower with hands as broad and calloused as leather aprons. He had been her father's friend, and after her parents were gone, he saw the lonely, watchful girl and offered her a place in the warm, clangorous world of his smithy. He never spoke of pity, only of work. He taught her the names of tools, the froe for splitting shingles, the adze for shaping beams, the draw knife for smoothing wood until it felt like river stone. He showed her how to read the grain in a piece of oak, how to temper steel so it would hold an edge, and how to mix the chinking mortar of clay, sand, and horsehair that would seal a cabin against the winter wind. He taught her that there was no such thing as useless, only things that had not yet found their purpose. On her 16th birthday, he gave her a small whittling knife. Its blade was fine German steel, and its handle was a piece of juniper he had sanded and oiled until it fit the curve of her hand perfectly. It was the only gift she had ever received that felt entirely her own, and she carried it always. Silas passed peacefully in his sleep a year later, leaving Daisy once more in the sole care of her uncle, a man who saw her not as kin, but as a line item in a ledger. The ejection, when it came, was as quiet and bloodless as an entry in that same ledger. It happened on a Tuesday morning in late September, the air crisp with the coming autumn. Her uncle, Thaddeus, called her into the small office behind the mercantile counter. He did not ask her to sit. He stood behind the tall desk, his fingers steepled, a stack of papers held down by a glass paperweight. I was a man made of sharp angles and thin lips, and he looked at her not with malice, but with the dispassionate air of a man settling an account. "The store has been sold," he said, his voice flat. "The new owner, Mr. Gable, will be taking possession on the 1st of October. He has a family of his own. There is no room for you in the arrangement." Daisy said nothing. She stood perfectly still, her hands clasped behind her back, watching him. He seemed to take her silence for incomprehension. "You are 18 now, Daisy, of legal age. You are expected to make your own way." He slid a small, thin envelope across the polished wood of the desk. "This is $7. It is what remains after settling your parents' final debts to my accounts for your board, and keep these past 6 years. The cruelty of it was its neatness, its administrative finality. There was no argument to be had, no plea to be made. It was a transaction. She had been a debt, and now she was paid off. She took the envelope, paper flimsy and weightless in her hand. She did not cry. The lessons of Silas Croft had been about more than wood and steel. They had been about bearing weight without breaking. She simply nodded once, turned and walked out of the office. She went to the small room at the back of the store that had been hers, and she gathered her few belongings into a canvas sack, a change of clothes, a blanket, a small tin of matches, and the worn copy of Robinson Crusoe her mother had read to her. Finally, she slid the juniper-handled whittling knife into her pocket, its smooth, familiar shape, a small, hard point of solace. She walked out the back door, closing it softly behind her, and did not look back at the only home she had ever known. The journey south was a study in dust and distance. Daisy walked for 2 days, following the wagon ruts that passed for a road. The sun, a relentless weight on her shoulders, the landscape of her childhood, a place of green river valleys and familiar hills, slowly gave way to a drier, harsher country. The trees grew stunted and sparse, and the earth turned a full dusty ochre. On the 3rd day, a freight wagon hauling salt and barrels of vinegar caught up to her. The driver, a man named Henderson, with a kind, tired face, offered her a ride in the back, and she accepted gratefully. She rode for another 3 days, jostled by the ruts and baked by the sun, watching the vast, empty land unspool around her. She ate the last of the bread she had taken and rationed the water in her canteen, feeling her world shrink to the simple, brutal calculus of survival. The wagon finally rolled into the town of Cottonwood Flats, a place that seemed less a town than a temporary argument with the wilderness. It consisted of a single dusty street lined with a dozen unpainted buildings, a saloon, a land office, a general store, a livery stable, and a few small houses. It was a place people passed through on their way to somewhere else. Henderson helped her down from the wagon. "This is as far as I go, miss," he said, tipping his hat. "Good luck to you." Daisy watched him go, the wagon shrinking into a dusty speck on the horizon, and a profound sense of isolation settled over her. She was a stranger in a strange place, with $6 and some change in her pocket, and no plan beyond the next hour. She stood in the middle of the street, the wind pulling at her hair, and took stock. The buildings looked tired, their wood bleached silver by the sun. The silence was immense, broken only by the creak of a sign and the distant stamp of a horse. She thought of Silas Croft, of his quiet competence, of the way he could look at a broken wheel and see not just the damage, but the precise steps needed to make it whole again. She took a deep breath, the dry air scratching at her throat, and walked toward the building marked Land and Title Office. The man inside the Land and Title Office was named Elias Vance, a name she learned from the tarnished brass plate on his desk. He was old, with skin the color of worn paper and spectacles perched on the end of his nose. The office smelled of stale tobacco and dust. He looked up from his ledger as she entered, his expression one of weary patience. "Help you?" he asked, his voice a dry rustle. Daisy placed her canvas sack on the floor and stood before his desk. "I'm looking for a place," she said simply. "Land, a claim, something I can afford." Vance gave a short, humorless laugh. He gestured vaguely at the maps on the wall, a patchwork of claims and homesteads. Everything worthwhile is taken, girl. Has been for years. Unless you've got $1,000 and a mind for ranching on a grand scale, there's nothing here for you. Daisy's hope, a small and fragile thing, began to wither. She thought of her $6. "There's nothing at all?" she asked, her voice quiet but steady. The clerk paused, tapping a long finger on his ledger. He looked at her then, truly looked at her for the first time, seeing not just a traveller, but a young woman standing alone with a straightness to her spine that spoke of something other than desperation. A flicker of something, memory, or perhaps pity, crossed his face. "There is one place," he said slowly, as if pulling the thought from a dusty corner of his mind. "The old Hatcher place, of here, up near the dry creek. Been on the books for 15 years. Nobody's lived there since Elias Hatcher went into the mountains and never came back." He described it in bleak terms: a one-room line shack, a collapsed corral, a well that was probably dry. The land was poor for grazing and too rocky for farming. It was considered abandoned, unlucky. "The county took it for back taxes years ago," he finished. "We can't sell it, but the law says we can release the deed to anyone willing to assume the tax burden going forward. It'll cost you $1 for the filing fee." He looked at her over his spectacles, expecting her to refuse. Instead, Daisy reached into her pocket and placed a single silver dollar on the desk. "I'll take it," she said. An hour later, she walked out of the office with a piece of paper that said she was the owner of 40 acres and a ruined cabin. It was a place no one else wanted, a place of last resort. But as she walked north out of town, following the clerk's crude map, she felt not despair, but a flicker of grim purpose. It was hers. The Hatcher place was even more desolate than the clerk had described. It sat in a shallow basin of land, surrounded by low, rocky hills dotted with juniper and sage. The cabin was a small, square structure of grey, weathered logs, its roof sagging in the middle like the back of an old horse. A single window stared out like a blind eye, its glass long gone. The corral fence had mostly collapsed, its posts leaning at weary angles. But the first thing Daisy truly saw, the thing that held her attention, was the well. It was 10 yd from the cabin door, a perfect circle of carefully fitted stones rising 2 feet from the ground. It was the work of a patient hand, the stones chosen for their shape and size, laid without mortar, but locked together by skill alone. It was the kind of work Silas Croft would have admired. She spent the rest of the afternoon walking the property, her boots stirring up puffs of pale dust. The land was indeed rocky, but in the low-lying area near the dry creek bed, the soil seemed darker, richer. The cabin, for all its decay, was built on a solid stone foundation. The logs were sound, silvered by time, but not rotted. She ran her hand over the axe marks on the logs, feeling the ghost of the man who had shaped them. Inside, the cabin was a single room, empty save for a rusted, broken wood stove in the corner and a thick layer of dust and leaves that had blown in through the open doorway and window. It was small, no more than 12 feet by 12 feet, but the roof beams were thick and true. It had good bones. As dusk began to settle, painting the sky in shades of violet and rose, Daisy knew this was a place she could work with. It was broken, yes, but it was not beyond repair. She set her sack down inside the cabin door, claiming the space. Her first priority was water. The creek was bone dry, and her canteen was nearly empty. The well was her only hope. The next morning, she found the old bucket and a length of frayed rope in the collapsed lean-to that served as a stable. She tied the rope on, her hands sure and practiced, and lowered the bucket into the dark maw of the well. It hit the bottom with a dry, hollow thud. Disappointment, sharp and cold, pierced her. But she did not give up. She knew that wells could fill with debris over time. For the rest of the day, she worked, lowering the bucket and hauling up load after load of dirt, fallen leaves, and small rocks. It was back-breaking, repetitive work. The sun beat down, and her muscles ached. By late afternoon, she had cleared several feet of debris. On the next haul, the bucket came up with something different, a rotted piece of wood. She lowered it again, and this time, as she scraped it along the bottom, she heard a distinct clink of metal against stone. She pulled the bucket up and saw what looked like an old iron hinge. She realized she wasn't just clearing debris. She was clearing the remnants of a well cover that had rotted and fallen in decades ago. Working more carefully now, she used the bucket to drag the debris toward one side. As she did, she felt it scrape against the well wall, and then it snagged on something. She pulled, and the rope went taut. She pulled harder, and she heard a grating sound. A stone had shifted, curiosity overriding her exhaustion. She worked the bucket back and forth, nudging at the loose stone until it finally tumbled into the bottom of the well. She lowered the bucket one last time into the small cavity that had been revealed. When she hauled it up, it was heavier than before. Inside, nestled amongst the dirt and pebbles, was a heavy oilskin-wrapped package, tightly bound with waxed cord. Her heart began to beat a little faster. She carried it over to the cabin's threshold and sat down, the late afternoon sun warm on her back. With trembling fingers, she unwrapped the cord and unfolded the stiff, waxy cloth. Inside was a small but heavy canvas sack, and beside it a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age, but protected from the damp by the oilskin. She opened the sack first. It was filled with gold dust, shimmering in the light, and a handful of silver and gold coins. It wasn't a fortune, but it was more money than she had ever seen in her life. Enough to buy tools, supplies, a window pane, perhaps even a goat. It was enough to begin. Then she unfolded the paper. The handwriting was neat and careful, written in faded black ink. It was "To whoever finds this," it began. "My name is Elias Hatcher. I built this cabin in the spring of 1874. I proved up on this claim with my wife, Sarah, and our daughter, Lily. We had planned to make a life here. The well was the first thing I built. A can live without a roof, but he cannot live without water. We were happy for 2 years, but the fever that took so many, that winter took my Sarah and my Lily from me. I buried them on the rise to the east, where they could see the sunrise. After they were gone, the silence of this place became too loud to bear. I am leaving what little I have. This gold is from a small strike I made up in the mountains. It is not much, but it is clean money, earned with my own hands. I have no family left to give it to. I am going back into the high country. Perhaps I will find peace there, or perhaps I will not return. It does not matter much to me now. My only hope is that whoever finds this is in need, and that you will use it to bring life back to this place. A home should not be swamped. It should be filled with the sounds of work and living. "Do not let it be forgotten." And at the bottom, it was signed Elias Hatcher, September 1877. Daisy read the letter twice, her fingers tracing the faded words. She felt a profound connection to this man she had never met, a man who had also known deep loss and had poured his grief and his hope into this small piece of land. She carefully refolded the letter and looked inside the oilskin pouch one last time. Tucked into a corner was one more item. It was a small, crudely carved bird, no bigger than her thumb, whittled from a piece of pale, smooth wood. It was the work of a loving but unskilled hand, a father's gift for his child. Daisy closed her eyes, clutching the small bird in her palm. In her other pocket, she could feel the familiar weight of the juniper-handled knife Silas Croft had given her. Two gifts from two good men she would never see again. One, a tool for shaping the world. The other, a small token of love. She sat there as the sun dipped below the hills, the silence of the place no longer feeling empty, but filled with a quiet sense of purpose. She was not just an inheritor of a piece of land. She was the keeper of Elias Hatcher's hope. The next morning, Daisy walked the long miles back to Cottonwood Flats, the gold dust and coins secured in a pouch inside her shirt. The weight of it was a constant, reassuring pressure against her skin. She walked not with the uncertainty of an outcast, but with the determined stride of a woman with a plan. Her first stop was the general store, a place that smelled of coffee beans, leather, and smoked bacon. She bought sacks of flour, beans, and salt, a slab of bacon, coffee, and a small cast-iron skillet. Then she went to the livery, where a man named Caleb Finch ran a small lumber mill behind the stables. He was a big, gruff man with a beard full of sawdust, and he looked at her with suspicion when she asked to buy lumber. "What's a girl like you need with lumber?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. "I'm rebuilding the old Hatcher place," she said, meeting his gaze directly. "I need cedar for shingles and a few good planks for the floor and a door." Finch grunted, but he saw the seriousness in her eyes. He led her to a stack of cedar logs. "You know how to use a froe and mallet?" he asked, testing her. "Yes," Daisy said. "Mr. Silas Croft of Prairie Ridge taught me." The name brought a flicker of recognition to the man's face. Silas Croft knew of him. He was a master wheelwright. "If he taught you, you know what you're doing." His demeanor softened almost imperceptibly. He showed her how to select the best logs, the ones with straight grain and no knots. He sold her the wood, along with a bundle of used but sound planks, for a fair price. He even threw in a handful of old straight nails for free. "You'll need these," he said, dropping them into her sack. "No sense in a good door falling off its hinges." Daisy spent the next weeks in a fever of labor, her days dictated by the sun and the steady rhythm of work. She started with the roof. Using a mallet and the froe she'd purchased, she split the cedar logs into hundreds of thin, uniform shingles, the sweet, sharp scent of the wood filling the air. She climbed onto the roof, stripped away the rotted old shakes, and painstakingly laid the new ones in overlapping rows, nailing them down until the cabin was sealed and watertight against the sky. She used the planks from Caleb Finch to patch the floor and build a solid, functional door that swung smoothly on new iron hinges. For the window, she stretched a piece of oiled canvas over the opening, a temporary measure that let in a soft, diffused light and kept out the wind. Her evenings were spent by the fire she built in the repaired wood stove, eating beans and bacon from her skillet, and planning the next day's work. She found the graves Elias had spoken of, 2 small mounds of stone on a low hill. She cleared the weeds from them and, using her whittling knife, carved their names onto a smooth Sarah and Lily hatcher. It felt like the right thing to do, a small act of remembrance. One afternoon, a woman on a mule rode up to the cabin. She was older, with a kind, weathered face and hands that were clearly used to hard work. "I'm Agnes Miller," she said, her voice warm. "My place is a few miles east of here. Saw the smoke from your chimney. Haven't seen that in 15 years. She held out a small pail. "Brought you some milk. A body can't live on beans alone." Daisy, surprised by the kindness, invited her in. Agnes looked around the small, clean cabin, at the tight roof and the solid door. "You've done good work here," she said, her eyes full of respect. "This place has been waiting for someone like you." It was the first time Daisy had heard a word of praise since Silas Croft had passed, and it settled in her heart like a warm stone. Agnes Miller's visit was the beginning. Words seemed to spread through the sparse community in the hills that the old Hatcher place was no longer abandoned. People were curious. They would ride by, slowing their horses to look at the curl of smoke from the chimney and the neat stacks of firewood beside the door. They saw the progress, the slow, steady transformation of a ruin into a home, and they respected it. The work itself was a language they all understood. Agnes became a regular visitor, often bringing eggs or a loaf of fresh bread. In return, Daisy helped her mend a section of fence on her property, her hands quick and sure with the wire and posts. They worked in comfortable silence, the shared labor forging a bond stronger than any words. Caleb Finch, the mill owner, would set aside good, straight-grained scraps of wood for her when she came to town for supplies, calling them cuttings and charging her next to nothing. "No sense letting good wood go to waste," he'd grumble, though they both knew it was a kindness. Even the town sheriff, a quiet, observant man named Brody, made it a habit to ride out her way once a week. He would never dismount, just rein in his horse and nod. "Everything all right out here, Miss Cole?" he would ask. "Everything's fine, Sheriff," she would reply. And he would nod again and ride on. His presence was a quiet, official acknowledgement of her right to be there, a shield against any who might question her claim. She was no longer a nameless drifter. She was Daisy Cole of the Hatcher place. With the cabin secure, she turned her attention to the land. She cleared the collapsed corral, digging new post holes and setting the old weathered rails back in place. She bought a pair of goats from Agnes, their bleating a welcome sound in the quiet valley. She broke the ground near the creek bed, where the soil was richest, and planted a small garden of potatoes, onions, and hardy greens, using techniques Silas had taught her about reading the soil and seasons. The well, once a symbol of her desperation, became the heart of her homestead. The water was cold, clear, and sweet. Each time she drew a bucket, she thought of Elias Hatcher, the man whose patient stonework provided for her decades after he was gone. The place was coming alive, just as he had hoped. The silence was gone, replaced by the gentle clucking of the chickens she'd acquired, the bleating of the goats, and the steady, rhythmic sounds of her own work. The chop of the axe, the scrape of a hoe, the soft thud of a hammer. It was the sound of a home being built, not just from logs and stone, but from persistence and awe. One evening in late spring, a year after she had arrived, Daisy sat on the small porch she had built onto the front of the cabin. The air was cool and smelled of damp earth and blooming sage. The sun was setting behind the western hills, and the sky was a breathtaking wash of orange and purple. Her small garden was thriving, its neat rows a testament to her labor. Her goats grazed peacefully in the rebuilt corral. From the open cabin door behind her, the light of her lantern cast a warm yellow glow. The place was no longer a ruin. It was a home. It was small and simple, but it was sturdy, warm, and entirely her own. In her right hand, she held the juniper-handled whittling knife that Silas Croft had given her. Its surface was worn smooth from years of use, a perfect fit for her palm. It was a tool of creation, a symbol of the skills and the self-reliance he had instilled in her. In her left hand, she held the small carved bird that Elias Hatcher had left behind. It was a token of love and loss, a symbol of the hope he had placed in a future he would never see. She thought of the two men, strangers to each other, from different parts of her life, who had both, in their own ways, given her a foundation to build upon. One had given her the skills to work, and the other had given her the means and the place to do it. Then she thought of her uncle, Thaddeus, the man who had cast her out with $7, believing her to be a worthless burden. He had seen her as a liability to be disposed of, a final entry in a closed ledger. He could never have imagined this place, this life she had built from what he and everyone else had considered nothing. He had mistaken her quietness for weakness, her solitude for helplessness. Daisy Cole was 18 years old when she arrived in this valley, an orphan with $1 to her name. She had spent that $1 on a piece of abandoned land that nobody wanted. It was the best $1 she ever spent. That quiet strength to see potential where others only see ruin is a rare and powerful thing. If stories like Daisy's resonate with you, the kind of stories that celebrate resilience and the quiet dignity of hard work, consider subscribing to our channel for more tales from the forgotten corners of history, and we'll leave you with this question to ponder. Have you ever found value in something that everyone else had given up on? Share your thoughts with us in the comments below. We read everyone.